Well, good evening. Well, it is here anyway at this moment, and welcome. So I have Bex with me, and Bekkah and Rand, and we are here to have a little bit of a discussion about, I guess, in some respects, it's the difference between spirituality and religion, maybe, and God, where exactly God fits into this, and so who knows where this discussion can go. I don't know. Do you want to say something to start it off, Bekkah or Rand, and let's see what happens.
Um, thank you for having us. And can I read what I wrote to you the other day about the sort of paradox between God being outside of thought but not? Yeah,
Go for it. Let's
start
start
with
there.
that.
Let's start there.
Okay. Let's find that. Okay, so nothing is outside of thought because thought makes up everything. Thought creates our reality and then says, I didn't do it. God or divine mind created everything, created me and everyone else. I am God and God is me. There is no place where God ends and I begin, and vice versa. Here's where I'm stuck. God created everything, and so God created the gift of thought. Yet thought makes up everything. Does this mean that God is outside of thought? Because without God, there wouldn't be a thought. But without a thought, I couldn't contemplate God. And then I think I answer it down here. Um, The question still arises, is God outside of thought? Well, no, because thought creates everything. Nothing is outside of thought. It's not possible. But God created everything, including the gift of thought. So maybe both are true, as there is only one thing happening, and that is God, the power of God running through us all, gifting us with these weird and wonderful human experiences. And this one thing clashes with the fact that we are dual beings, so our finite minds struggle to fathom that both yes and no is true at the same time, coexisting together in the same nanosecond. That's kind of where that idea, the idea of this topic stemmed from.
Wow, what a discussion. And I guess one of the things to sort of start with is like the words, isn't it? Words like God and thought with a capital T and thought with a little t. These things, what is it we are pointing towards? And using words to point to things that are much bigger than something that can be contained in a thought. So yeah, to me, God, like thought with a capital T, it's like making something out of an ingredient, isn't it? God becomes those things. It's like if you have a piece of plasticine and then that plasticine molds itself into thoughts and molds itself into a Bekkah and molds itself into a Beck and a Rand and a Deb and all these kinds of things. It doesn't stop becoming plasticine, but it takes on something else as well, if you like, So the raw ingredient of what it is, there is one ingredient here, there is one thing, and then it is a creative essence. It has creation within it, so it creates these things, but it doesn't create with something that is outside of itself. It creates with itself. It can only know itself. It is only itself. Nothing is not that one thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I had a question and it went away. So where does religion stand on this? So like the three principles or the inside out understanding or any spiritual teaching isn't a religion, but it's like a religion because it's got a community, it's got a set of sort of principles or natural laws. This is how we work, this is what we follow. Be kind to others and be kind to yourself. and the Bible talks the same way, and that's, Christianity. So where does it sort of separate, or that makes sense?
Well, I would say at the base of every religion is spirituality. I don't think there's any difference at the base of it. And although you are saying the three principles says be kind to people and anything, the principles themselves are actually just an explanation of what is going on. There is no, people in the principles world may say, and we may understand the principles and say, therefore, let's be kind to each other, because from this understanding, this makes sense. But the principles themselves, and what Sydney Banks was pointing to, don't tell us how we have to live our lives. They don't suggest anything. They don't give us, they are just right. This is how you are experiencing anxiety here. This is how you're experiencing happiness here. This is how you're experiencing, everything, every experience that you have. This is how it is created. And then there's a full stop. That's it. Now, like you say, people have, and I believe that religions are basically the same, but then people create communities around it and then start having discussions between themselves and saying, well, therefore that means we should all be kind to each other. So shall we make that a rule? And then we should, break bread on a Sunday. Shall we make that a rule? And then we should, whatever it is. And those rules make sense because of the understanding you have about your spiritual nature. And that bit is the religion, if you like. That bit is, shall we create a way of life based on what we are beginning to understand about who we believe God is, who we believe Jesus is, what we believe the world is, what we believe we are. We've looked into that, started to understand that. So shall we therefore make some rules and some ideas of how we live based on this understanding? Whereas, to my knowledge at this time, all the principles are doing is pointing and saying, this is how experience is created. Do what you will with that. A formal religion hasn't been created around it.
Yeah. So if that's the case, that's how I see the three principles. I guess I misworded my words when I asked the question the first time. That's how you say it. So it's very clear to me that the three principles is a description and not a prescription. It's not telling you how to live your life or how to overcome something. It's just saying, this is how thought works. This is how you're experiencing life. Do what you will. So in my opinion, knowing this and religion can work hand in hand, because if there was somebody who was, either a Christian or Muslim or whatever faith they're following, they can still know that they're feeling their thinking. Like, it's not, they don't clash. One doesn't cancel the other one out. Whereas two different religions could potentially cancel the other one out because they may be following a different set of rules. At the heart of it, it may have the same spirituality, but then the rules may be slightly different. So, as far as I'm aware, Christians can eat pork, but Muslims and Jewish people can't. So, there's a different set of rules. You can't be both Christian and Jewish or something like that, but you can.
Kind of. But okay.
Yeah. I mean, not as a complete full stop, but just as an example. But you can come from the three principles or inside out understanding, knowing that you're feeling, you're thinking, and follow a faith at the same time. Like, it's not, I don't know, it just doesn't, it makes sense to me that they can both work hand in hand. Whereas I was told by somebody, in their opinion, that they cancel each other out. So I just wanted to know your opinions on that, really.
There's you'll probably know this, but the principles actually ended up sort of in this country through the Jewish faith. like predominantly it was Jewish. It was the first time Deb went to London to hear, it was at the synagogue, wasn't it, Deb, that you first listened to the principles in London? And there's a massive following, like a massive kind of amount of Jewish people that are in and around the principles community, as we call it. And I think kind of what you're saying there, to me, that's because what the principles is pointing to is simply a description of how life works. What you then do with it is entirely up to you. And therefore there's no reason why you couldn't choose to live a religious life, follow a particular religion, because the whole thing here is we're saying life works, that, it's a little bit like saying a car works this way. Great, so I'm now going to go and buy a Renault Clio, but Deb's going to go and buy a, what have you got, Deb?
VW.
Yeah, a VW. And you might say, well, I know how a car works and I'm not going to drive at all, thanks very much. It's like knowing how something works just allows you to know how that thing works. And that's kind of it for me. It's like, it's a simpler. And I think that's actually sort of what you were saying when you read your messages out at the beginning, wasn't it? You were kind of like, so it works like this, and it kind of works like this. And so really it's just, I can live my life how I want to, and if other people, and definitely I know when I first, because you'll know my background here, but I don't know if people watch this, they might not. Deb and I grew up in a Christian-based, a Bible-based family. And when I first heard about the principles, one of my biggest things was, how do I marry that up with what's in the Bible? Like, I can't say that what's in the Bible isn't true. That feels real and true and appropriate and right for me to know that. And how do I match that up with the principles? And so we had actually one of the books that I read that had a massive impact and helped me on that was a book called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And I won't even recommend it, but it was really good for me. But if you're interested in playing around with that, but I know that when we were first having conversations, Deb and I, like what she kind of talked about was, this is just how life works. And actually you can even see the stuff in the Bible that talks to that. And we're actually reading some stuff at the moment that's bringing some of that out. Deb's got an amazing book that we're reading at the moment.
Our
two favorite books right now. And actually seeing that maybe in different language and maybe with different metaphors, Jesus was saying the same thing. Like, what you think you create, ask and ye shall find, what you look for you will see. And it really helped me to go, oh, so you're not trying to tell me this is how to live your life, you're simply telling me this is how life works. And if I take that and want to go off and be a Christian, be a Muslim, be a Jew, be nothing, be a person that owns a Renault Clio, the outsidey bits is my choice from there. But when I'm doing the outsidey bits and I don't know how I work on the inside, I make a bit of a mess. Like, I made one hell of a mess on the outside because I didn't understand how it worked inside. And so very much for me, it's like, if you want them to, the two go very well hand in hand. And equally, does it matter if you don't understand how we term this and you're religious? Of course not. If you're finding something beautiful in your religion, if something is awake in you and you feel connected to God in whatever way that makes sense to you, and you never know these principle language that we use, so what? Like, the only thing that really occurs to me is, are you having a pretty good life? And where that's coming from, whether that's, yes, because I know who God is and I go to church and I praise God and I preach and I worship, good. I can't emphasize enough, that's the only thing really. And if you come across the principles and you say, great, I don't want to go to church anymore or have a religion particularly, I just want to have my own kind of worship within me, good. Like, this is about what wakes you up. That was the thing I really saw in this. What wakes you up? Don't know if that,
I guess from the perspective of religion in a way, and going back to the car analogy, you know, religions and the rules about how to live your life that, you know, religions are there for, if you like, that they put on. Religions are, this is what I would guess and think, and from what I know about life, religions are a vehicle to take you to God, I guess. That is the idea, that is what is behind them. And I think sometimes the problem sometimes with religion is we get God and the vehicle confused. And I think it's the same in the principles, to be fair. I think, you know, I don't think this isn't about bashing anybody, principles or religion or any of it, you know, it is. And once we have put words on something, we have moved one step back from the truth, whether that be a religion, you know, even naming God, or, you know, the power behind life, whatever word, whatever name, whatever we put on it, that is putting a limitation on something that is not limited. And so, you know, it's bigger than that, whatever this is. And I just think sometimes, and I believe we can all be guilty of this in various ways, sometimes we confuse it's the signpost for where we're going, you know. And if we were to, if you look at the analogy of the car, if we all wanted, I don't know, like you wanted to, when you came to the conference, you know, you wanted to come to Westwood Ho to be at the conference. And if you'd have thought, well, I drive, I'll get this, you know, I'll buy this car or whatever, and we'll go there. And then you made the car, the thing, not getting to Westwood Ho. You know, the car became all hail the great car. Isn't the car amazing? Isn't the car, doesn't it do this fantastic? And it does do a fantastic job because it brings you to where you want to go. But if you think the car is the destination, then you're going to have missed the conference, you know, the amazing stuff that was going on at the conference, sort of thing. And it's a little bit like that, you know, religion and even the principles, the words of the principles, they are a vehicle to point you to God, to a deeper truth. You know, God might not be your word, but they're pointing you to this deeper truth, something that is true about you. And if we kind of get lost in the but and we have to and we must and it should of any of those things, we're worshipping the vehicle, we're not looking to the truth, if that makes sense, in all of those, not, you know, not just really in anything anywhere.
So when I'm in awe of how we work, that's not what you said. Like, that's not idolizing the vehicle. Or is it?
To me, when we are in awe of how we work, that is more about we are in awe of God, because how we work is God in action.
God manifest. Yeah. Yeah.
When we feel good, when we, you know, when we connect, when we feel good, that is the connection that we are feeling. In that good feeling is God. You know, we're getting closer to that truth. A good feeling gets us closer to it. I mean, we can't separate, you know, earlier on when I used the plasticine analogy, try to get rid of the ingredients that you are made from. You cannot be separated from what you are made from. You know, how could you possibly? It doesn't matter where you go, what you do, who you are, what you say, how bad or good or anything, you cannot separate yourself from that which you are made from. And it is just a knowledge of that which you are created from, you know, that the knowledge of the essence of who you are comes with a good feeling. And it's kind of like, yeah, you're connecting back to that truth of you. And when you try to separate from it, when we move too far away from it, it's painful, because, you know, if you tried to do that physically, you know, separate life from your body, separate life from who you are, separate, you know, try and run away. It's like trying to run away from your shadow, isn't it? Try and run away from it. And it would hurt. If you trying to do that hurts. And so that the feeling of pain and hurt is, you're trying to separate from your truth, your essence. And a good feeling is, yeah, get comfortable with the truth of who you are. It feels good. And it's up to you. You don't have to. Feel bad if you want.
I don't have like questions. I've just got kind of more words to what you've just said. In
Cool, go
terms
for
of
it.
the car and like focusing on the car rather than the destination. So I don't know if this is in Christianity or just how, something I was taught. So that's more the idealism part rather than the focusing on the God part. So you can build loads of rules and idolize the rules, which go, get stuck into that and forget the God part, forget the love part, and then just stay with that idol that you've created, which is all man-made.
Yes.
So it's like kind of try and put away with the idolism and sort of go to the next point, really.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think like I know for me that was one of the reasons why I left my church. For me personally, it wasn't a judgment on the other attendees and that church community, but I had lost the looking at God part, and I was just so focused on the rules. All I could think about when I was at church was I wearing the right clothes? Did I remember the right Bible verse today? Did I, and it was like, I'm not with God when I'm in church anymore. So I needed to move away from that and reconnect with that. And I know, like, even to kind of bring the conversation into what we're sort of almost in hopefully a nice, happy, healthy way, comparing that kind of religion and what we're calling the Three Principles community. Even within that community, I have seen and had conversations with people where we're doing that. We've suddenly got, like, I've had conversations with people where it's been, you have to use the phrase Three Principles and you have to talk about mind, thought, and consciousness. That's a rule. That's made up. That's not the point of what we're pointing to. And I've had conversations where people say, you can't use the phrase Three Principles anymore. It confuses people. They don't get it. It's not what you should talk about. Another rule. It's like, hang on a minute. Here we are again, making up rules, idolizing the wrong thing, making the words the thing rather than what are we actually pointing to here. And I know for me and Deb, we've had these conversations and said there are moments when I'm in front of a person and the thing that makes the most sense to share with them is mind, thought, and consciousness, and the Three Principles. And there are times I've had clients that wouldn't even know that I talk about the Three Principles or know what they are, because in all of the sessions I've had with them, it hasn't made sense to me to share it that way. And I think that's the same, whatever group of people you get together. In our house, we have made up rules about who should or shouldn't do the recycling or clean the house or wash the car. and sometimes we forget, the whole point here is we just want a nice, tidy, clean house. Does it matter if it's my day to do the rubbish or your day to do the, whatever? And anytime you get a group of people together, we make up rules because they look helpful. That's where they come from. Like in any context, if we come up with a rule, be that a loose rule, like it's loosely my job to do the recycling, or if it's a really firm and fixed rule. We go to church on Sunday, for example. That was quite fixed in my house growing up. Whatever variation that is, if you get a group of people together, we will inevitably come up with rules because it sort of helps us to know what we're doing. It sort of helps to go, yes, Sunday is church day. Otherwise, you'd wake up every day and go, I'm going to church today. I can't remember. It gets a bit confusing because of the way we work out in the form. It's helpful. But it's like you were just saying there, Rand, when we begin to make those rules the absolute be all and end all, we've lost the point, or we've disconnected from the point. And the point is God, love, whatever word that is for you. And I see that no matter what community you're in, even if it's 4 adults in a household, we make up the rules and we forget. We never obviously break our own rules. But it kind of doesn't matter as soon as you bring humans together, because we're having to connect in the ways that we've been given, the God-given ways that we communicate. We kind of have to work within that. And a huge amount of the time, rules are really helpful. Like if I, you know, decided to drive on the right hand side of the road in this country, that would be a rule that would very quickly be a little bit problematic. You know, and so it's like sometimes there's a place where those rules are quite helpful if we stick to them. But it's playing around with, is this rule helping me? Is this idea, this concept of doing it this way, bringing me closer, waking me up more, allowing me to recognize who and what God is in my life, whatever that means to you?
Yeah, all of this is really helpful. I just have one, well, I say one more question. Who knows if I'm going to have more than
Bekkah with one more.
one more question right now. When me and Rand have our very interesting conversations, some of them we've recorded actually, we should listen to them.
Cool.
We circle back to the same point in the end. So like Beck said about the cars, you know, we're coming at different angles, but so we're adding 1 + 3 and 2 + 2, but we're still getting 4, we're still getting love. Like the point of life is to live a loving, you know, happy, free life. That's the whole point, to be free, to be at peace, to have fun. But the place I think where we get stuck is, I say, and I see this, the paradox of it, that, you know, we are created by God and we are God. It's that both. Whereas Rand will say, she uses the food analogy of, you know, that she eats food, but she isn't the food. So, you know, she can have the Holy Spirit, right, you said, but not, she wouldn't use the term that she is God. So I know it's just we're getting pedantic on words, but I just wanted to know your view on that, because for me that makes sense. I am God, but I'm not. Like, I know I'm saying yes and no in the same sentence, but that makes sense to me because I am. There is a part of me that I am the creative essence of the entire universe, which is God. But I'm also human. But it's like, it's not two things. It's one thing, but it looks like two things. And it's just amazing, and I love it. And it
gets fun, doesn't it? Yeah. And definitely for me, like, probably the way you're saying it is pretty much the same as what I would say. For me, it feels like I'm both God and not God. I'm not God in that I'm Beck and I'm a human, I'm having experience, and I'm God because I'm made from the same stuff, I'm made from the same ingredients, I'm created in God's image. It's like I am God in that sense. And I think for me, then I start to get a little bit lost when it's like, hang on, pick that apart. Where does that begin and where does that end? And at that point, when that starts to feel a bit confusing, I've gone into my head, and that's not helpful to me. It's like, I like living down here in my heart. So it's like, when there are times in my life when I can honestly tell you the most helpful thing in the world for me is to know that God is not me, and therefore I can turn to God and God will be helpful for me. And there are times in my life when it's really helpful to know that God is me and I can lean into that internal power. And so for me, it's as simple as what feels the most helpful, what, like, inside me, what is most helpful and feels the best right now in a given moment. And I think then it's okay. I don't know what Rand would say on that, because I think you shared your bit, but maybe if Rand wants to share that bit, but either's fine. Does what you feel and share and see feel good? Like, when you, how
Suppose
you
for
see
me,
that?
instead of saying I am God, I would say God is in me. Like, maybe it's just a play of words.
Pedantic.
Yeah, being very analytical.
Yeah, and I think
that.
and I think with the words, then it's like they sound like different words, but if you look to the feeling of that, what's the feeling of that for you?
It's the
like,
same sort of
so
peace or the glory of, you know.
So we're actually talking about the same thing, because we get that from the feeling. And that's kind of what you said at the beginning, wasn't it? 1 + 3 and 2 + 2. You're just using different words. And the way we know that is because the feeling is pretty much the same. Like, we're in a sweet feeling here. There's a sweet spot here that feels good to me. So I don't know if that answers what you were sort of trying to ask there, Bekkah, or if Deb's got anything to throw in the mix.
But if Deb's got anything to share, always love to hear her voice.
I think to me it is when the confusion comes when we separate out too far, you know, I know when I think of God, you know, if I am struggling with anything and I think of God, that the distinction that was really helpful to me was, I know when in the days when, you know, the religious upbringing I had and the idea that I got, and I'm not saying anyone else gave this to me, the idea I got was God was something separate from me. God was a thing outside of me. And what the principles did was brought that love, that divine power, that whatever, to something more than I suppose, yeah, God is within me, but I am within God is more the way that I would see it. And, you know, again, is it? But it's like I'm not, when I look at God as something separate and someone who does things to me or doesn't do things for me or something like this, yet when I see there is no separation there, you know, God, I am within God. I am an aspect of God. I am part of that. It just that whole, and it's almost somewhere that my mind goes, if you like. Before, my mind would go to God, and now my mind goes to God. You know, and that the feeling of that is very, very different. So yeah, but I think it is more, it's definitely, I think the feeling aspect of it is the most important thing. You know what, and we all have our own, none of us in human form. And yeah, there was one of the things I wanted to say. What I like with this conversation and spirituality and looking in this direction is I would much rather say this and this rather than this or this. It's like yes and, yes and, yes and, rather. It's very often with the paradox of you know, looking to spirituality, which to me is the base of all religion, looking in that direction, it can feel very paradoxical, and it can feel, well, therefore, if you're saying this, you're not saying that. Whereas what I see more is I'm saying this and this. You know, we are one and we are separate. We are, you know, it's yes and rather than yes, no, either or. You know, all is God. And because we in human form haven't got full access to all of the knowledge that is within God, we have some knowledge of that, but we don't have all of the knowledge that is within where we are. You know, God is and then in this little form we kind of go either or, either or, either or. And that is separation. And there is no separation within God, within truth, within love. They're I guess the basis of it is there are not two things, as in the idea I had when I was following a religion was, and this I can't say whether this was my idea. I'm not putting this on the religion. This was my idea. But the idea that I had, and very often the idea I see out in the world with people, with human beings, is there is good and there is evil. And they are two separate things. There is a source of good and a source of evil. And what I really see is there is one source. God is the source of all. And when you read the Bible, God says, I make alive, I wound and I heal, I make alive and I kill. God himself doesn't say I'm fighting against some evil force. God says I am that force too. I am all of it. And that to me is the crux of that. That's what I think it's important. And the idea, when I had this idea that God was somewhere out of me, outside of me, something separate to me, that was a part of this idea that there is more than one source of something. And to me, what everything in the Bible is pointing to is there is one source. all things flow from one place. There is a flow of love, and that is all there is. And we can block that flow in our human form and feel as if something evil is happening, but it's all coming from one place. There are not two places. That we do not have to fight against an evil that is a different force to the force of love. It is more, which is why turning towards truth is the answer rather than fighting against, because fighting against is us getting in that's what creates the illusion of evil, fighting against, whereas turning towards brings back together, comes back to truth, comes back to ultimately one source. So to me, that is the crux of the question that you brought here. Is there two things? No, there isn't. There's one. There's one thing masquerading as many. And once it masquerades as more than one thing, then it creates the illusion of separation. And we live in the illusion of separation. And when we live too far into that illusion, it gets painful because it is untrue. Being human, being here in form is ever so slightly painful to something that is one. But it's a pain that we don't even notice because we are so used to it. And that is, we get further and further and further into that pain. And then we start calling anxiety and depression and fear and insecurity. And it is just, you're separating. You are trying to separate too far. You're trying to make two things. You're trying to actually make two things out of one source. And it's impossible. And it hurts when you try. So the nearer we come back to one source, the less pain we feel. The further we move away from that, the more painful it feels. And being human is kind of like a bit of a payoff. We're kind of having this fun, we're having this real, this experience. We can fall in love because we can see ourselves, we can know ourselves, we can know those, we can watch ourselves, we can know good, and and we can see it at play because of the illusion of two things. So it's a real gift. But we get this sat nav, this internal sat nav that keeps us safe, that says, whoa, you're taking this a little bit too serious, come back. So I don't know if there was anything helpful in there, but
Yeah, that you answered a question I didn't even ask. I was going to talk on that as well, because we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a group of people about, is there evil for that? Because I think I said everything is neutral. And when I say that, people come up, well, that's not true. So when I said everything was neutral, somebody responded in the fact that, okay, yes, every person is neutral, but there are some evil actions. And we ended up talking about child abuse, which is like sort of in a human form the worst sort of evil action that any human can think of. And I think a couple of years ago you guys made a video with that title, What About Child Abuse? So maybe I should go rewatch that. But we ended up talking about it. I don't remember what we concluded on, but I think we just got lost around the words. And I think I ended up saying, like, yes, in terms of the evil action, but it's only evil if you think it is. And then I think I brought this conversation to my cousin, and she said, oh, let me play devil's advocate, and said, who said child abuse is wrong? Now, she isn't justifying it at all. She just decided to put that point out there. Who decided child abuse was wrong? And it's like, even that was a thought. Even that came from a thought created thing. It's not justifying it. It's not saying, go do bad things to people. But it is definitely an interesting topic, maybe for another day. But yeah, you touched on evil. Like you're saying that there isn't two sources, which helps me massively, because I mean I wasn't raised in a very religious background, but I was baptized Catholic, and I went to church here and there. But for me, praying was like a begging. It was like, please, you know, give me this thing that I want. And then when I didn't get it, or when I was in a massive depression, so when all of that was happening and all the suffering that I saw, because for about 5 to 6 years of my life, it was just, I saw a lot of suffering in the world, in the news, in my heart. And so I thought, if, you know, if there's a God, if there's a God that is good, why is there so much suffering? So that, you know, knowing the, coming across this understanding just spun that all around for me, and helped me to clear that it wasn't God doing this to me. It was me innocently creating myself stuck in that space, and that freed me. Knowing that it was me, yeah, I'm not in control. Knowing that paradox just freed me. But yeah, I think Rand has a question. I don't know if
Got a question to you. You said you prayed like, and it felt like begging. What other feelings were you going through? Like, did you feel at peace whilst praying? Did you feel
no, like God was
nothing,
unjust.
like
No, like God was unjust.
distant? God is distant.
God was
or
unjust.
Unjust. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
No,
asking
God,
for something, like
definitely.
a child when
Like,
Yeah.
for me, this is me at like 18, 17, 18, and without going too much into my past, life was very difficult for me. I had an amazing upbringing. I had, you know, a roof over my head. I had a mum who supported me, but internally, I had this massive internal struggle. I don't know where I got thoughts from. I don't know. Something happened along the way, and I picked up these thoughts, and there was a massive eternal struggle for me. So I believed God was unjust, and if there was a God that is good, why are such evil things happening? And I read the newspapers a lot, and it was predominantly about child abuse is what I tended to see, or people getting killed or things like that. So at some point I decided to stop reading the newspapers and listening to the news, and then one day I just came out of my depression, and then, you know, 5, 6 years ago, I stumbled upon what we call the 3 principles, or inside out understanding. But yeah, there was, my thought for me was like, when I sort of fell out of my relationship with God, was that if it's an unjust God, why should I believe in it? You know.
I think that is a common thing that people put, and that is the whole two sources thing. It's like God is the source of good and God's losing, evil's winning. What's going on here? But you know, when we come down, for us to have a true human experience, we need to be free. You know, fundamentally, we are made from the essence of God, which is freedom. And so and God is so good that you have the freedom to completely imprison yourself. And if God were to step in and to say, oh no, you know, you're doing this wrong, I'm not going to let you do that, then you don't have free will. You know, you're just back. You might as well stay. There's no point coming and having a human experience if that's going to happen. You might as well stay in the experience of oneness and God, because this is an experience. This is a human experience that we're having down here. But it is, you have the absolute free will, and there is like a framework that never ever changes, that you are playing within. And when you work out that framework, you see how safe and protected and loved and looked after you are. But if you hit up against that framework, it would be like saying, you know, I want to change gravity, and it's like, it's never going to happen. You know, if you drop a pen a million bazillion quadrillion, I don't know, a number beyond anything, if you drop it, gravity is going to stay consistent. And the reason it is going to stay consistent is because you can then learn how to work within gravity to create your life. And God is consistent. God does not step in. This is that, you know, you can turn to God, you can ask things of God, you have You have a sat nav, you have feelings, you can follow your feelings, you can follow a good feeling, you can create it because you are made in God's image. But he's not going to, only through this guidance, like your inner guidance is, your feelings are always going to tell you the truth. Always. They're never going to change. That's never going to not. You know, a good feeling takes you closer to God. And if you believe something is a good, you know, if you punch someone and you kind of have this egoic thing and you think that's a good feeling, nope. A true good feeling is going to take you to God. And this is about knowing yourself. Because we have, you know, false highs and false feelings, but truly knowing ourselves, we recognize, and this is discernment, and everywhere we are guided. And religions are great at guiding, you know, putting things, the disciples in the Bible, you know, the way that they mention the 12 disciples, they're 12 aspects of our human life that we can nurture and learn to understand about ourselves, and discernment is one of those. And, you know, steadfastly looking for the good, seeing the deeper truth in everything. These are things that we can learn to do as humans. That is a framework that is just like gravity. They're spiritual laws, and like gravity, they are not going to change. It doesn't matter whether you murder somebody or whether you love someone, those rules are going to stay the same. And God's consistency, and if you have ever been, or anyone who's watching this, if anyone has ever been in like an abusive situation or any of that kind of thing, one of the things that is really confusing is this whole idea of I never know what it's going to be next. Like God never, ever, ever, he is totally, he, she, whatever, totally consistent. Absolutely. You can rely on the consistency. And that is so freeing. That is so beautiful. It's just reliable all the time. You're going to get the same result no matter how you drop a pen, and gravity is you're going to get the same result always and forever. And if you connect with this love and move towards God, your feelings are always, always, always going to tell you where you are. And your life, what is going on outside in form, is going to tell you where you are. Always. And you can blame other people, and you can say it's God's fault, and you can say this or that. It's always information and guidance for you. Always. Unchanging.
No, I was just going to add, so in terms of like the natural law, you said gravity, free will is equally a natural law. That's why both evil and good, if we're going to label them as that, exist. And one can't exist without the other. So both just exist. It's like that law of free will, meaning, you know, A and B, if they were opposite ends, they both exist. At the same time, maybe someone's doing something good, the other person's doing something wrong.
And where that, you know, all of that you can see is our judgment. I mean, it was an interesting thing when Bekkah said, you know, who decided that child abuse was bad? Now, if you look through history, things that we as societies and that have labeled as, you know, shouldn't happen and are bad things, we change our minds all the time. You know, what we can do, what the laws are, what we see as good, what we see as bad, that changes all the time. And it is in whose opinion. And that's our judgment on something. God does not have that judgment. If God had that judgment, it wouldn't be here and it wouldn't be happening. God does not have that judgment. We have free will. I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to.
Oh, it's a great conversation, isn't it? I feel like we could keep talking for another hour, probably. But
I think you
just said that. Another question. She said, I do, but it might take another hour.
No.
Well, let's do this again.
One more. Did you say you have one more particular question?
The particular question is relating to what Bekkah said in terms of, is God outside of thought? For me, I would say yes. Like, God created thought and we've got our own understanding, but we can't fully explain or understand God. So that's something that's unknown to us. Like the full form of God, the full power, the full this, that. So God, for me, would be outside of thought, like bigger than thought.
So more in, I guess in the question is more, if you turn the question around, is thought outside of God?
No.
And thought is the human thought.
No.
So, but is
What thought
is
are you?
thought, is thought something that is separate to God? Is there anything that can be separate from God?
I wouldn't, no, I'd say no to that. If, like, you know, in a strict yes or no, then no.
So if nothing can be separate to God, then thought is within. And I mean, if you swap the word for consciousness, for the plasticine, for this, you know, whatever it is, there can't be anything that isn't that same thing. So it sort of boils down to the same thing, because I think the fundamental mistake, and when we get into trouble, is this idea that there is two sources of something. And if there is only one source, things can only be made from one thing. So in essence, everything is only one thing. And I guess that is the fundamental. If we believe that fundamentally there is a source of good and a source of evil, then that to me is when we struggle and suffer. And that to me was what religion pointed me towards. Understanding the principles has made me realize that there is one source of all things. And whatever words we put on that, and whatever word, you know, you will see when we start to struggle and suffer, there is some idea that there is something outside of us, something separate, something that is not within that plasticine, within that consciousness, within what we would call God in that frame. And the idea that there is, you know, I think many people think that God is supposedly good and then there is a source of evil. And therein lies your problem, if you like. Because then we're trying to conquer evil. We're fighting against something. And the minute we are fighting against something, not coming back towards, we're creating more of that.
Yeah. For me, answering that question, I mean, I answered it in the message as well at the beginning, is God outside of thought? The answer is yes and no. Because God is outside of thought because God created thought, but to contemplate God, that's thought. You couldn't contemplate God if we weren't conscious, if we weren't aware, if we weren't here as a human, couldn't contemplate God.
But God is, like to say, all God's creations are within God. So God is both thought and outside. God is everything. So God is not, thought is not something that is not God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it might strike us another conversation later on.
You can't have thought and God. You just have God and then
God.
things that.
And can God be the umbrella term? And then underneath it's like, say, the natural laws, for example, underneath the natural laws, what that means.
I guess it is like, to me, the way that I, and you know, can make that make some sense is, again, coming back to plasticine, if you like. There's one ingredient, like God is just like a huge ball of plasticine, and then, you know, God created thought, but ultimately thought is plasticine, and thought, and it's like, okay, so in a way the plasticine analogy works, breaks down when you kind of separate it and have your little, you know, in your mind's eye you see something as this thing and then God, but it's all, there isn't anything that isn't plasticine. The space is created from plasticine, but there isn't anywhere where God ends and something else starts. The plasticine sort of molds itself into that, but does not break away. Is not something apart from, separate from, not within that.
So it isn't a hierarchy, it's all within.
Yeah, it's all within.
Because that's what you're trying to say, no? But it's a hierarchy.
No. Just like
Because you
there's
drew-
one source
Yeah.
at the top, and that would be God, and then underneath it, like the religions.
Because
the
when you
natural laws.
drew the picture, like you wrote God, and then you put everything underneath.
Yeah.
I don't
Pointing towards God. But,
Yeah, like with
or
it.
stemming from God as the source, the only source really of it all.
Mm.
But for me, I would still split like the good and evil in that religious sense, but I wouldn't see it as that's not God, but I would say like my actions isn't God. Like I have that free will to act how I want to act. And me doing something good or bad isn't God per se. Like it's all stemming obviously from the creator, but it's not, I'm not gonna, if I do something bad or if someone else does something bad, I'm not gonna say, oh, God did this. Like in a negative way, if that makes sense. I wouldn't be like, oh, God's terrible. Like unjust. Or in that sense, I wouldn't put that action to God doing it, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think I would kind of say when things feel bad to us, to me, what I see there is we are not seeing that thing through the eyes of God, because I don't believe that God can see evil. I don't think that is a concept for God within God. You know, I don't think. And when we are looking upon something as bad or unwanted or evil, we need that contrast to be human, to have a human experience. We need to make up and believe in that contrast. But truthfully, within God, there is no contrast. There's just love. There is one source. So when we feel that pain, it is because we are not seeing this as God sees it. We've separated out a little bit. We're not seeing what God sees here. And that is why, you know, all sin can be forgiven, because there isn't any. God doesn't even see sin. How can you do anything wrong? Because everything that you are doing, it has got to be God's action, ultimately, because the only one taking any action here is God. There's only one source. And the minute we believe there are two, we're starting to move a little bit too far away. There's only one source.
I think that's a nice place to end, otherwise we'll be here all night.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, ladies. Let me just